Hello there. This is part 3 of me going through the New Yorker article written by Rachel Aviv that came out earlier in May 13th, I think it was. This is the third part. I'm having to break it up into bits because there's a lot in it. There's a huge amount in it. So I'll do another section of that. I made a few notes, so I'll read it and then intersperse it with some notes that I've written, going through it bit by bit. It's going to take quite a number of stages, this, and I don't want to do it all in one go because it would be too long and my concentration goes. I just want to take it in sections. I don't want to miss anything. At the end also, I've been listening. I've got a little bit more to listen to, which is episode 15 of We Need to Talk About Lucy Letby over on Spotify, which is presented by the cough's back, Peter Elston and Dr. Michael McConville. It's called New York, New York. The reference is obvious. It's all about this article, the ramifications of it. And it goes into a lot of other areas as well. But there's a bit I wanted to pick up on what I heard in that podcast this evening. And just I'll do that at the end though. But I'll start with going back through the article itself by Rachel Aviv. So we've had 3 deaths in June 2015. Now it's 4 months later, there's another death. So there's, I don't know if you remember what I was saying last time is, you've got these 3 deaths in very quick succession, then there's 4-month hiatus by the quote-unquote murderer. Anyway, I'll carry on reading. 4 months later, another baby died. So this would be July, August, September, it would be October. So yeah, presumably that's baby D then, child D. 4 months later, another baby died. I think this is, I'll just break off here, I only just started, but I think it's interesting that the way it's being told here, a different narrative style, is not constantly referring to the child's initial and everything. It's telling it in a different form of storytelling. When I say storytelling, I don't mean fiction, but it's a technique of fiction actually, but it involves you as a reader in a different way, I believe. 4 months later, another baby died. She had been born at 27 weeks, incredibly premature, just past the age that the unit treated. In other words, just a tiny bit more premature. The baby would have gone to a level 3 unit, Arrow Park, or the Liverpool Women's Hospital, something of that nature, or Alderhay. I think they're the 3 in that area, level 3 ones. And just to recap, COCH was a level 2 at the Countess of Chester Hospital, was a level 2 at this time, is now a level 1. So at one point she was transferred to another hospital called Arrow Park for more specialised care. She had an infection and a small bleed in her brain, so she's incredibly premature. She's got an infection and she's got a bleed in her brain, and she's been transferred out to a very, very high intensive care unit. But after 2 nights she returned to the Countess, and I think sadly that sealed her fate, that poor baby, going back to that unit with those doctors. That as will come up later in the article, and what I've said in previous videos, as Alison Timmis, a consultant on that unit, said, was in chaos. The unit's in chaos. This is the period. We're into autumn here now. We're into October, November for this death that's going to happen. And this is the period in which Alison Timmis, a consultant, not one of the Gang of 4, says the unit's in chaos and that it's unsafe. And that and we're not being listened to, i.e. all the staff, we're not being listened to. It's unsafe. We can't, too many babies for the staff that they've got. And she predicts that the result would be deaths of children, and she was right. But they blamed them all on an innocent person, or not all of them, but 7 of them. They blamed 7 of them on. And that's a whole other issue. What of the other 10 deaths? What of them, So after 2 nights she returned to the Countess, where her condition deteriorates straight away as soon as you get back to that place. Breary told me, quote, senior nursing staff were blaming the neonatal unit that sent back the baby saying that they hadn't been entirely honest, that they were just trying to clear a space. Because it's all like this kind of blame game going on, isn't it? But the reality is, what happens at the Countess of Chester Hospital when that baby returns? Is that the case that they shouldn't have sent? Does that level 3 unit Arrow Park hold any responsibility for sending them back to the baby back to Countess of Chester? Possibly, but the bigger issue, the more stringent issue, is what was going on in the Countess of Chester Hospital for all these babies to be dying there. Not a murderer. A whole lot of other things. Yeah, they were trying to clear a space. The baby's mother worried that the staff at the counters were too busy, understaffed, chronically understaffed, dangerously understaffed, to pay proper attention to her daughter. She recalled, that's the mother recalling, that a nurse named Nikki was, quote, sneezing and coughing whilst putting her hands in the baby's incubator. Well, that's really going to help, isn't it? That's really going to help. A baby that had an infection, a bleed on the brain, 27 weeks. 27 weeks. The mother added, to top it off, whilst Nikki was in the room, the doctor, who was seeing another baby, asked Nikki, the nurse who was sneezing, if she was full of a cold, to which she said, yeah, I've been full of it for days. I don't know if she spoke like that. I've been full of it for days. And just to I've made a little note here, just to mention, and that's in the context of a unit that's had this chronic hospital wastewater and sewage issue, where the sewage and the hospital wastewater, well, they're kind of one and the same thing really, but with a lot of other toxins in them coming up through the sinks, coming up through the toilets, flooding over the tiles, the floor tiles of the area, dripping in through. I keep going over this because it's so important, and Dr. Scott McLachlan's articles on this on Substack keep going over it, because it's where it's all pointing to, all these infections. So that the baby was stabilised at Arrow Park, goes back to the COCH, hasn't got a chance, sadly. It was a death sentence for that poor baby. So you've got all these staff, there's one member of staff, sneezing and putting a hand in the incubator. It's just outrageous. And you've got this perennial, constant sewage and hospital wastewater leakage problem. It's in the crawl spaces above, and these pathogens, they go everywhere. You can't get rid of them. I mean, you'd have to close it down and do some kind of, and even some kind of deep clean probably wouldn't get rid of it. I don't know how they'd get rid of it. I mean, if you look at the Substacks that Dr. Scott McLachlan did, he describes how difficult it is that once those kind of pathogens, once that kind of soup of pathogens are in a unit, you hardly ever can get rid of them. You'd have to shut it down for a long time, and have a period when you're testing it out and everything like that. But they didn't shut it down at all. They're just firefighting with it, getting the plumber in again and again and again, which came out in the court that he was always there. He was there every week to stop these dripping pipes with the sewage coming out in the crawl space above, overflowing, backing up through the sinks, backing up through the toilets, sloshing all over the floor. All these tiles, how are you going to get all these pathogens? They're just, you can't see them. They're microscopic. They're everywhere. They grow everywhere. Once they colonise certain areas, it's just... So the mum's saying, I've been full of it for days, the nurse says. So even the doctors were aware and didn't do anything. End of quote. That's the mum saying. Didn't do anything. Doctors are well, yeah. Oh, you got a cold, have you? Oh, I just saw you sneezing. Bless you. And I just watched you put your hands in the incubator of my incredibly vulnerable baby, and you as a doctor didn't say anything. Or what you doing here? What you just sneezed? You think you might want to wash your hands at the very least, or maybe not be at work at all if you've got a cold like that. You've just sneezed and then you put your hands right into the incubator of a baby that's got 27 weeks. 27 weeks gestation with an infection before. It's just criminal. Can you begin to see why they're so urgently wanting to cover up what's happened at that hospital? And this is something I talked about many months ago in the 2 videos called Follow the Money, which is that I believe this would set off a chain reaction, a domino effect across all, probably the vast majority of neonatal wards across the country. It would be billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds, potentially in medical negligence cases and issues like this. But they chose to make a murderer. You know, that there was that series on Netflix, Making a Murderer. They've done it here. They've made a murderer. They've constructed a murderer, and there's a lot of reasons why they did it. Follow the money. Follow the money. That's not the only reason, the money, but it is a big factor of it. Another part of it is the arrogance and the disgusting arrogance of these 4 consultants, Breary and Jayaram in particular. And then you get the psychopath, sociopath, narcissist, Evans involved, and the absurd police, the absurd, ridiculous, corrupt, dumb police. Back to Rachel Aviv. Stop my rant. Back to Rachel Aviv. In a survey the next year, so that would have been 2016 then, a survey of more than 1,000 staff members at the Countess. About 2/3 of them said that they had felt pressure to come to work even when they were ill. Come on. Open brackets. None of the hospitals mentioned in this piece would comment, citing the court order. They wouldn't have commented anyway. They wouldn't have commented. People, it's all been shut down. You know, we heard this last year. Staff are told, say nothing to nobody. Say nothing to nobody. And there was an early video I did on this article, wasn't there, where there's been some information leaked to Rachel Aviv, which shows that on the inside, yeah, they know they're not allowed to talk about it, but they want to get information out there. I expect many of Lucy Letby's former colleagues and possibly some of the management that are still there, you know, they want to get information out to people like Rachel Aviv and others who are looking into this. Carrying on. The staff tried to send the girl, this is this 27-week premature baby, to a specialised unit at a different hospital, but while they were waiting to confirm the transfer, she began struggling to breathe. Are you surprised? Are we surprised she's struggling to breathe? She's back there, stabilised at Arrow Park, comes back here, all goes wrong again. Nurse sneezing all over her, putting her hands all into the incubator, hospital wastewater, pathogens all over everything, terrible understaffing. She began struggling to breathe, this poor baby. Her designated nurse, this is important, this bit, her designated nurse, it's all important, her designated nurse was not yet trained in intensive care, i.e. her designated nurse was not Lucy Letby, and she shouted for help. Lucy Letby, who had been assigned to a different baby, came into the room, followed by 2 doctors, but the baby continued to decline and could not be revived. So she comes in, there's 2 doctors with her, there's the other nurse that was there, there's other people milling about, and then, is this the time she murders the baby in front of everyone? Is this when she does it? It's not her designated baby. She's not been looking after that baby. Another nurse has been. She comes into the room with 2 doctors. Is that when she murders the baby in front of everyone? Is that when she does it and nobody notices anything? No one notices anything. A doctor later saw Letby crying with another nurse. Quote, it was very much on the gist of, that must be the doctor saying that, it's always me when it happens, my babies. So this is hearsay, isn't it? It's what the doctor is saying that Lucy said at that particular time about this incident. That's what we're meant to believe. It's a bit curious, that, but I'll say why in a minute. The doctor said, so it's hearsay from him about what he said, someone else said, i.e. Lucy Letby. Adding that this seemed like a normal reaction. Okay, that's all right. Lucy Letby texted Margaret, that's obviously her friend, another nurse, probably I think a senior nurse, that she had spoken with a neonatal unit manager, Arian Powell, who had encouraged her to, quote, be confident in my role. So that must be Lucy Letby reporting this in her voice to Margaret. So be confident in my role without feeling the need to prove myself, which I have felt recently. Now I wonder why she had this need to prove herself at this stage in autumn of 2015. Why was she needing to feel that need? I suspect it's because the rumour mill was working overtime, contrary to what Breary and Jayaram are re-scripting about what was happening in June. I think they were starting the whispering campaign from that summer onwards. We've heard it earlier in this article where Breary and Jayaram backfill and change the script, flip it again and just say, oh no, we didn't, we thought that was it. Breary says, no, that could have been quite normal, nothing to really look at there, that Lucy was there for 3 deaths, but suddenly when there's a 4th, then all those 3 come back in. All the 3 that they weren't suspicious of Lucy about, they immediately come back in because 4 months later there's another death for very explainable reasons. Can you see how it's being constructed out of absolutely nothing except spite, bullying and scapegoating by these absolute bastards Breary and Jayaram, with this guy who's nearly retired, Gibbs, and this Dr. B, we don't know much about her, on their coattails. But we do know about Dr. B, apparently, that Dr. B, Lucy Letby felt Dr. B didn't like her, i.e. didn't like Lucy Letby. So we've got a lot of spite and rumour and viciousness floating around already, haven't we? Okay, so... But the point is here, though, and this is the doctor putting it in this timeline, and then it's been reported by Rachel Aviv. But in this particular case of this is happening in October, November of I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's obviously 4 months after the June, so July, August, October. It wasn't, this baby wasn't Lucy Letby's designated baby. So why is Lucy Letby being said to refer to this baby as her baby? And it gets worse. It gets worse because, it gets worse because Jayaram and Breary chime in with it saying, well, why is it always her on it? Well, the other nurse was there. It was the other nurse's designated baby. And the 2 doctors who came in. Bloody, it just makes me bloody angry. Just the more I read over and over. You can see what they've done. I can see what they've done. This ornate building up of this spite and rumour and building it tile by tile by tile, creating this hideous wall of misinformation and lies and rumour and ugliness, destroying someone bit by bit by bit, workplace bullying taken to its nth degree to destroy someone's life utterly. And the bastard, corrupt British police and CPS and judiciary all come chiming in and are happy to throw all their power and weight behind it, and the sick British media as well. Three of the nurses on the ward attended the baby's funeral, and Lucy Letby gave them a card addressed to the child's parents. So Lucy Letby she gave them a card to the nurses that did attend the funeral. All that was twisted into her taking delight, into some kind of duping delight that, oh look, I've murdered your child, and I'm not going to write a card to you saying this. Lucy saying in the card, it was a real privilege to care for her and to get you to know you as a family who always put her first and did everything possible for her, she wrote, i.e. Lucy. Quote, she will always be a part of your lives, and we will never forget her, thinking of you today and always. That's Lucy's character there, right there. All twisted by the police, all twisted by the CPS, the prosecution, all inverted into its opposite, as some kind of delight of a murderer getting away with a murder, and then just sort of saying how much she cared about the baby, and she would, knowing that getting off on the idea that she could further con everyone and say make out as though she was sad about the baby dying. It's just, and but they won't take it at face value that that's the beauty of her character and her caringness about these babies. They won't. Jayaram, sorry, the names now. Jayaram, who was on duty during the girl's death. Oh, so he was there as well, was he? So how come he wasn't the murderer? I'm not. There were no murders. But how come he wasn't the murderer? He was on duty. Why Lucy? Why not Jayaram? He's on duty. Why not him? I'm not saying that seriously. I'm just saying how absurd it is that it's based on the fact that she's on duty. When they said before, when Jayaram and Briri said before, the 3 deaths in a row in close succession in June was explainable and nothing to really worry about. Briri said that. Jayaram was on duty during the girl's death, discussed the events with Briri. They share an office, you see. We know this. They did. And another paediatrician, well, I think that's probably Dr. B. Probably, I think they would have mentioned Gibbs. Probably. Can't say for sure, probably. Quote, you know what's funny? He said, this Jayaram, you know what's funny? Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah. He said that he told them, quote, it was Lucy Letby who was on. End of quote. And we all looked at each other and said, this is all Jayaram saying this, and we all looked at each other, these 3 bastards, looking at each other like 3 bastards would do. You know, it's always Lucy, isn't it? It's always Lucy. 4 months after the last death, and the 3 deaths in June weren't thought to be anything to do with her. There's another death we don't know. We don't know, and I don't know if Rachel Aviv even knows. I don't think she necessarily does. Were there any other deaths? I mean, I've actually got the stats for it. I could look for it. I could look for when the other deaths, the other 10, because there's 17 deaths across 2015, 2016. 17, not 7. Lucy was convicted of 7. There are 10 other deaths. When did they happen? Who was on duty for them? This is the note. As I go into that here in my note I wrote. I'll just read out the note I wrote. So 4 months earlier, Briri and Jayaram now tell us that they're reconstructing their timeline of suspicion. That's what they're doing in this article where they've blabbed, they're flapping their gums with Rachel Aviv, thinking they're safe because Lucy's condemned forever, flapping their gums and letting things go, letting red flags go all the time, showing up red flags. So Briri and Jayaram now tell us, reconstructing their timeline of suspicion, that they thought it was reasonable and explainable and not anything of notice that a nurse might be on duty for those 3 deaths back in June, and they were in very quick succession in the period of about a week, less than a week, I think. They tell us, less than a week. They tell us they tell us that above in the article. And they hadn't suspected Lucy then. They also tell us they hadn't suspected her. But I believe, personally, and this is why Lucy said she felt she had to prove herself, because she knew the rumour mill was going on already, from June, from those 3 deaths onwards. Or maybe even before, because they didn't like her. They didn't like her because she reported doctors' errors on the system called the Datix reporting system. She wasn't shy to do that. She wasn't willing to suck up to them or be matey to them. She put the patients first, so she reported the doctor's errors. They probably disliked her for a long time. The bullying, I think, was in its incipient and earlier stages, much earlier on, probably even before the deaths in June. They didn't like her. Didn't want to be on duty at the same time with her, because if they made a mistake, they couldn't rely on the other nurses. Oh, you won't, no need to report this nurse. No need to report this nurse. That would be the paediatrician speaking. Oh, don't report, no need to report. But they knew Lucy would. They knew Lucy would hold their feet to the fire where other nurses would not. And that's crucial. So they tell us in the article above in the article here, that they hadn't suspected Lucy then in June. I believe they were gunning for her after those deaths, and possibly before, due to her tendency to report doctors' errors, as I just said. And now, after a 4-month gap, but then I say that in inverted commas because we don't know about these other 10 babies. I could look that up actually, but nonetheless, after certainly a 4-month gap in the cases that the deaths that the paediatricians and then Evans and then the police, then the CPS, then the prosecution are deeming suspicious. There's a 4-month gap for sure there. 4 months later, another death, and suddenly it's always Lucy. So they've flipped. Can you see how they've flipped? Before, 3 deaths in a row, quick succession. Oh no, that can happen. That can happen. 4 months later, 1 death for a set of very obvious reasons why it would happen. With all those problems that poor baby had, was stabilised in a level 3, came back to there and with a nurse sneezing and hospital wastewater passengers, understaffing, 27 weeks old, 27 weeks gestation. And it's always Lucy. It's always Lucy. Isn't that sickening? Can you see the workings of it? Can you see how banal actually it is? Banal in the sense of so obviously constructed it is. That their focus on her was obviously constructed out of bullying and malice. Can we not see that? And I put here, just following on from notes like that, and I've done that in many other videos, but because I'm going through, I'll just repeat certain things. She works more hours than any other nurse there in the unit. There's lots of agency nurses there coming in and out, doing short shifts. She's working more than any other nurse, doing more nights than any other nurse. But also, and in this case, this case of the death 4 months after June, the baby isn't her designated baby. It's not her designated baby. So why didn't the other nurse come under their suspicion? Why didn't the other nurse? Because it was the other nurse's designated baby, or one of the 2 doctors that came in with Lucy Letby. And apparently, Lucy Letby murdered the baby while everybody was there. Did they? Did she? Or did they say that she did it at some other time? When? If it's not her designated baby, what point? When? Oh, Christ. It's staggering. So why wasn't the other nurse who came under their suspicion, or one of the doctors, or Jayaram? He was on duty. For God's sake. You can feel them backfilling. This is these 2 bastard consultants. I hope you're watching. Sue me if you want to, you bastards. The truth's going to come out about this Jayaram and Breary, you pair of narcissistic twats. You evil bullying bastards. The truth's going to come out. You can feel them backfilling and concocting the script as they go. This is those consultants. To create a building narrative of warranted suspicion. But it doesn't add up, does it? We've seen already it doesn't add up. They want their cake and eat it all the time. In other reports, they suspected her earlier on. In this one, they're telling Rachel Aviv they didn't suspect her, only on the 4th baby. And then all the other 3 become suspicious automatically when they weren't before. I keep going over it because it's so obviously ugly and horribly constructed. So mendacious and vicious. What have I put here? You can feel them all backfilling and concocting a script as they go to create a building narrative of warranted suspicion, i.e. that their suspicion was warranted. But it's all bogus. It's tendentious. It's trying to calculate it to get you to believe certain things happened in a certain order, but they keep contradicting each other. It was calculated to scapegoat someone from the beginning. A little clue quite a big clue where Lucy Letby says, well, I felt I need to prove myself after the death of that. I've been feeling that. Since when? Since June. Because of the rumour mill, the whispering of Jayaram and Breary and others, other nurses as well, probably. But here's the kicker. Here's the thing. There are no grounds upon which they should have suspected her of anything. There are no grounds or evidence and no grounds and no evidence for them to suspect her of anything. No more suspect her than suspect Jayaram because he's there, or those other 2 doctors who came, or the nurse whose designated baby it was in October. Why not suspect her? Because you've got no evidence or grounds. Well, why suspect Lucy Letby? But you haven't got any evidence or grounds. None. Nothing. There's no evidence against Lucy Letby. This is the extraordinary thing about this case. There's none. Zero. Nothing. It's a fabrication of malice. It's a fabrication of bullying and malice, constructed to look like it's real, like it's a real set of convincing arguments. There's no evidence, nothing. This is the... Okay. I've said that, no evidence, no. Other than the deaths, it's just other than the deaths happening when she's on duty. What about the deaths that happened when she wasn't on duty? How many of them are? We don't know. We don't know whether she was on duty or not on duty for those other 10 deaths. We don't know. We don't know when they happened. Well, we know the month they happened, but we don't know who. We haven't seen a roster for those other 10 deaths. So there are 10 other deaths in 2015 and 2016 that weren't part of the charge sheet. 10 other deaths. Who was on duty for those deaths? Which nurses? And more importantly, which doctors? Which doctors were on duty for those? Which other names can we make a nice little roster for, with all the X's to come up among for those 10 deaths? You know, let's have a go at that. Let's see what that looks like for those 10 other deaths. We're never told the circumstances of those deaths because the consultants and the fraud, Dowie Evans, has pushed all those conveniently to the side as being explainable. Only Evans can know that. Evans can easily, because he's a genius, you see, can decide what's explainable and what's not explainable, what's expected and what's not expected. The pathologist can't, none of the other doctors can, no one else can, only Evans can. Then you get him into court, get a lot of other hired guns and they'll just back him up. Bowen will just back him up. Because she hasn't looked at any of the original material in terms of all the cases to make her own assessments of which ones are explainable and which are not. I've said that so many times. She just works off Evans's bogus reports, basically, and the notes attached to them. But she ain't doing the choosing from the 32 cases. So she's not replicating it. It's not a blind replication of the process that this fraud Evans underwent, because that was a completely constructed thing as well, because he knew what he had to pick. He knew which cases he had to pick and which ones he had to keep away. And then further down in this article, we have an absolutely definite, provable example for him being told to keep one case out of it, which blows the other 2 cases that were charged and were actually the smoking gun cases out of the water. Just that alone. Just that alone. So I say, you know, so Evans and co, all the bastards, Evans, the police and the consultants, all is one big morass of bastards. They pushed all those other deaths to the side as being explainable, but presumably because Lucy was not on duty for them. Or I don't know that 100%. I'm not sure anyone does. I don't think it's in the public arena about these other 10 deaths that weren't part of the charge sheet over those 2 years. Or was she on duty for 1 or 2 of them, or some of them, or however many? But they simply couldn't pin them on her like they could the others. So they just went for as many, cynically, as they thought would fly, and did fly in the trial. Although at the very last minute, there was an 8th murder charge. They just drop it at the last minute. They spent 3 years. What was it? Yeah, since 2017, they've spent more than 3 years. They've spent 2017 for the beginning of the investigation. Got 6 years on it to bring a murder charge, to drop it at the last minute. That was the 8th murder charge they dropped, which I believe is Baby K, because the Baby K died at a different unit, but they were saying that what Lucy had done to this baby, Lucy's being retried for the attempted murder of this baby in June, but they're saying it led to her death at another unit, but they dropped that at the last minute. 6 years to prepare that case and drop a murder Look at the caprice of it. Look at the caprice of this investigation and this prosecution, that they can drop a murder charge after 6 years saying it's a murder, more or less. Well, maybe slightly less than 6, but certainly 4 years believing and saying it's a murder and charging her with a murder. Certainly at least 3 years before. Drop it at the last minute. It's disgusting. Just finish off this last little bit. God, this is taking longer than I thought. It's me rabbiting on, but I feel very passionate about this. Back to Rachel Aviv, New Yorker article. They shared their concerns about the correlation with senior management. That's these consultants, Gang of Four, sharing their concerns about the correlation with senior management, or at least Breary and Jayaram. And Powell, Arian Powell that is, conducted an informal review. Then there's a quote here. I have devised a document to reflect the information clearly, and it is unfortunate she was on, i.e. on duty. She wrote to Breary, i.e. Arian Powell wrote to Breary. Quote, however, each cause of death was different. Right, so this informal review probably would have happened in November/December 2015 then. 5 months, 6 months after the June deaths. So what exactly did they offer Arian Powell with their concerns? Did they simply mention and only mention that there were these deaths, 3 in June and 1 in October, and that just Lucy was on duty and that was it? Was that the extent of it? I mean, it's just bizarre, isn't it? That's it. That's all they brought to them. That's all. Well, they didn't bring anything. What else did they bring? Did they bring any evidence? No, we would have heard about that. Did they have any suspicions about a method that Lucy had done, that Lucy had done something to the baby? No. To these babies? Presumably so. Presumably that's all they said to the management. Oh, Lucy happened to be on duty. For God's sake. Well, so were you, Jayaram, at that, on that, and the other doctors were, and the nurse, the designated nurse was as well. I mean, Arian Powell, bats it back to them, just stating that each cause of death was different, ascertained by the pathologist. But Evans, we are not reckoning for Evans, are we? Because Evans, years down the line, a few more years down the line, based on, as he calls them, shabby notes all out of order, he can decide that there's a similarity between them all. Arian Powell doesn't know what she's talking about. Pathologist doesn't know what they're talking about. None of them do. Pathologist actually did the post-mortem, but Evans has got these notes that are all out of order. So clearly his opinion counts more than anyone's, doesn't it? It would do, wouldn't it? It would do. So Evans, later on these shabby notes, he decides there's a similarity between all the deaths, deliberate harm, in contradiction to the pathologist who actually examined the babies after they died and performed post-mortems. Evans can turn everyone else's views on their head. He can rubbish them all. They're all trash. And he can do it on the basis of a bunch of shabby, out-of-order notes, years down the line. And Evans, himself, the man himself, not even being a pathologist and not being a neonatologist. Not being a pathologist and not being a neonatologist. That's where I'm going to leave that article for now. But I'm just going to, as I said at the beginning, I didn't realise I'd go on this long with this. I'm just going to make a little point about what I heard in episode 15. I'm just scrolling down if you can hear that noise. Episode 15 of We Need to Talk About Lucy Letby on Spotify with Peter Alston and Dr. Michael McConville. I'm nearly finished listening to it, but something came up there which struck me, and not having the full transcript, as I don't think anyone has in this country, because it's cost over £100,000. I believe the New Yorker got it though. I think they bought it. They thought it was worth it. they thought it was worth it because this is going to become it was a huge world story, this idea of the serial killer nurse with babies, but it's going to become, there's going to be a second chapter to this world level story, but for a completely different reason, and that's the miscarriage of justice. That's the miscarriage of justice, and the fallout of this is going to be astronomical. I'm scrolling down here. I should nearly be there. I've got the camera on the computer. I didn't want to move it. Oh, here we are. Episode 15 of We Need to Talk About Lucy Letby. There's a point in it where Peter Elson says that Dowie Evans, the expert, who doesn't want to be called an expert, we have to remember that. He doesn't like being called an expert, you know. He certainly isn't one. So he was honest about that. That's what he said in court. Dowie Evans in court said that baby L was the 60th case he appraised. So what does that mean, the 60th? We keep hearing that he looked at 32 cases. That's what he tells us in all the interviews, 32 cases. From that, I've always inferred, and I think everyone has always inferred, that means 32 children, 32 sets of medical notes for 32 different children. And there may have been so-called events, multiple events that he believes happened that were deliberate harm within an individual case. So you've got cases and events. There's some real confusion about what are cases and what are events. It comes down to the language here and the clarity of it or the lack of it. So when he says in court that it's the 60th case he's appraised, does he mean in this investigation, or does he mean across his career? And by case, does he mean an event, or does he mean a separate child? That in which cases he looked at 60 children, which completely contradicts the idea of the 32 cases, 32 sets of notes that he was sent by the Cheshire Police in July 2017. But so does he mean event or case? So what were these then? How do they fit into these 32 cases? Does he mean 60 events across 32 cases of babies? Is that what he means? Is this fast and loose playing with terminology and what is being spoken about? I don't know what's being spoken of. Because then Peter goes on to say, well, what about the other 35 events Evans appraised? So again, we have this kind of mixing of the word case and event. We need clarity on that. I'm wondering whether it's one of two things. It's one of two things, and there's inaccuracy in the language here, or there's just like using different words for the same thing to cause confusion. I'm talking about Evans here. And that there were 60 events across 32 cases, i.e. 60 events, so multiple events for individual children, and the 32 cases make up the 32 sets of separate medical notes with multiple events within them, going up to 60 apparently. Is that the case? Was he referring to his previous bad time he's had in court when he's been told that his evidence is worthless by a judge not that long before he appeared in the Lucy Letby trial? I don't know. Cases and events, they can't be used interchangeably. One has to mean one thing and one has to mean something else, but we're getting confusion here. So as I say here, I was confused by this bit. Are they multiple events for the same baby? I.e. each baby's a case which has multiple events going up to 60 in total for all the cases. Is that the case? Dr. Michael McConville then asks, what is an event? Who decides what is an event? And that's very crucial as well. Who knows what is an event? What is the definition for an event? Were all the crashes so-called events, and were they given to Evans as part of the 32? Are we meant to believe that the 32 cases that Evans says he looked at, 32 sets of notes given to him by Cheshire Police, constituted the full amount of deaths, the 17 deaths? I know it wasn't the 17 because he didn't do the August 2016 death. Didn't do it because Lucy had left the unit. red flag, massive red flag. But are we then to believe the 15 other cases that he's got were 15 other crashes or events for 15 other babies? We don't know. Because if we don't know what the as Michael was saying, if we don't know what the definition and who's deciding what's a crash and when it's a crash and when it isn't, and more importantly, when it's a crash that gets sent to Evans and when it's a crash that doesn't get sent to Evans, when it's a sudden medical deterioration that does not get sent to Evans, and why, and when does it and when does it not, and how many were not that could have been and should have been sent to him. Clearly, the insulin cases, the so-called smoking gun cases that are found by Breary in 2018, a year after Evans has got the 32 cases, separate lots of medical notes to look through, because they'll need a smoking gun because they know these other ones won't stand up at all, won't get to court, won't reach a charge. They've got to find something else. What we know for sure is that those 2 insulin cases, which become the ones that pull everything else in their wake in the trial, the ones where the verdicts are 100%, all 11 votes, and they come back as the first verdicts reached. We know that they weren't deemed crashes. We know that they weren't deemed crashes. How do we know that? Well, because if they were, Evans would have seen the documentation for that and would have seen those allegedly high insulin recordings back in 2017 when he's looking through them all in July, wouldn't he? So we know they weren't. And that's a massive problem in itself. So why weren't they? So it shows how fast and loose and how capricious, again, this notion of what they decide, as Michael's asking here perfectly reasonably, who's deciding what's an event? Who's deciding what's a crash? We can see with the insulin cases that they can just, those babies obviously didn't suffer sufficiently in their stay in the hospital. Their health didn't deteriorate suddenly enough or worryingly enough to be deemed a crash, to be sent as a set of medical notes to Evans back in 2017 so that he could see those insulin laboratory results. It needed Breary to root them out a year later. None of it adds up. None of it adds up. None of it adds up. I'm only a quarter way through this article, a lot of this stuff has gone. Went over all this stuff 8 months ago, nearly 9 months ago now, in other videos. None of it's adding up. None of it ever has added up. And yet they did it. And yet they've done this monstrous thing to this innocent nurse, to cover their asses, to save a huge amount of money, to save a huge scandal. And there we are. Absolutely appalling. The words don't cover it. It is going to be overturned. It should happen soon. There's going to be an explosion after the restriction of reporting after the June trial. There's a lot of people, a lot of journalists, independent ones, and they're going to get their teeth into this, and off the back of the work that's already been done by people like Richard Gill, a huge amount of work there, Peter Alston, a huge amount of work, Dr. McConville, and the person that I refer to so much all through my earlier videos, Dr. Scott McLachlan on the Law Health Tech Substack. I'll copy all the links again. I'll do it for every section of this, going through this article. Trust Science on Trial, of course. And Kerry Morris's video, of course, that came out a little bit later, but really tells it with amazing clarity and style in the sense that it grips you into a story about this is wrong. You need that. You need these. You need the methodology of You need a certain amount of rhetoric in order to put this. This is what they did in the court. That's what they did in the court. They told us. They told a lot of lies about Lucy Letby, and the jury believed them. And they did it in very underhand ways, disgustingly underhand ways. That thing that prosecuting barrister said about, well, do you remember being born? Do you dispute it? It's all the most hideous. I can't think of the word now. It's I better stop. I can't think of the words anymore. I've run out of steam. More ugliness, more bullying. The heart of this is bullying, actually. It sounds like it should never be able to go this far, but go this far it has, and it will be rectified. It will.